Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. And if you're here in the United States, happy Labor Day to you. Around the world, Labor Day is the day, well, as the name suggests, that we celebrate the successes of the labor movement across the United States. But more than anything, it's the last day of summer in America. It's the day that summer comes to its conclusion. Even though astronomically it's got a couple more weeks to go. So we're super happy to be here with you. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we got an internet open forum this hour. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, so you say on Labor Day we're celebrating labor.
Well, I suppose
I thought it was like
taking
the day
a break from labor.
We really buckle down and perform extra labor. Have I been doing it wrong all this time?
Oh, no, you are doing it exactly right. As a matter of fact, I have some laundry if you'd like to get that later. And
Okay,
that's
sure.
exactly right. Oh,
How's your
Jimmy,
lawn?
you're exactly. That's what I need. You're in the true spirit
That's the
of Labor
Day spirit. Yeah.
Day. I'm not in the Labor Day spirit. I'm in the take it easy spirit on Labor Day. I always have mixed feelings about Labor Day. I remember going back to school as a kid. Labor Day was, I don't know, it's not so much anymore because I think kids start in the beginning of August or middle of August or something, but used to be that sad end of summer feeling. But I'm happy to be with you. You probably enjoyed going back to school. I was not.
No,
No. Oh.
Not so much.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then we have that in common. I always felt it was a bit of a curse to go back to school, but school's good for you, kids.
Vitamin school.
So what we have, Jimmy, is a bunch of questions from the internet for you today. And the internet provides wonderful questions. As a matter of fact, this might be something people don't know so much or think so much about what we do here at Catholic Answers, but there's a lot of just answering questions via the internet. You've done a lot of that over the last 25 or 30 years or however long you've been at it.
I'm in my 30th year now.
Oh, you're in your 30th year. Congratulations, Jimmy. So here's what the internet, I suppose when you began, they didn't come from the internet, but they probably came on postcards and letters and every other way.
Yeah, like 5-page letters of handwritten blue ballpoint pen cursive from crazy people. Yes.
So the internet saved you from having to read scribblings. Now at least they have to type it out. And maybe it comes in all caps. Maybe it just comes in regular letters. But we got some great ones for you. Let's go to the internet. Let's see what the internet has to ask you, Jimmy.
Okay.
Here's from Christy. If a Catholic was not a practicing Catholic at the time they eloped and married a non-Catholic who says they were baptized as a teenager in a Catholic church after attending a service once, doesn't sound Catholic. That's what this person puts in parentheses. But has no proof of baptism and no one in their life, including them, remembers where or how baptism might have happened. Is their marriage a natural, valid marriage or invalid?
Well, it depends because in the 20th century, in the late 20th century, there was a provision in canon law that exempted people who had formally defected from the Catholic Church from the requirement to have a Catholic marriage. And so if these parties were both Catholic and both had defected, then there was a window of time, if they both formally defected, there was a window of time where their marriage would have been considered valid. However, that loophole has since been changed. And so today there is no loophole. And depending on when the marriage took place, it would be clearly invalid under ordinary circumstances. So it wouldn't be a natural marriage, it wouldn't be a sacramental marriage, it would just be invalid. But you'll notice I said under ordinary circumstances. So there's a twist, which we'll come to.
Okay, because the question continues, and if the Catholic wanted to become an active Catholic and baptize their toddler, what would need to happen first, if anything, besides confession?
Okay, so these are two different goals: becoming an active Catholic and having the baby baptized as Catholic or their toddler baptized as Catholic. Um, Strictly speaking, in canon law, the only thing that needs to happen for the toddler to be baptized is for there to be one of the parents needs to consent to the baptism, only one of them actually, but also there needs to be a founded hope that the child will be raised Catholic. And that's really all the law requires. So neither of the parents actually has to be Catholic. They just, at least one of them has to agree, and there has to be a founded hope that they'll raise the child Catholic. Um, but here in this country, priests don't apply that law strictly, typically. What they'll frequently do is delay the baptism of the child as a way of encouraging the parents to get their situation sorted out, like get them
Oh,
started coming back to church, or get their marriage situation fixed, or things like that. Um, and so they I hate to say it, but most priests in this country actually violate the requirements of the law in order to try to help the parents. Um, and there is a kind of rational basis for this, in that if the parents are stable practicing Catholics who have gotten their marital situation figured out and straightened out, that provides the child with a better upbringing and a better education as a Catholic. At least it should in principle. So there is kind of a rationale for that, but a lot of priests are bending the law, to put it charitably, in what they require. In terms of becoming an active Catholic, well, confession is the primary thing that needs to be done. The other thing that may need to be done is it deals with the marital situation, and on the assumption that the marriage is invalid, then the spouses would either need to live as brother and sister, or get their marriage convalidated, or get their marriage blessed in colloquial speech. But as I said, there's a twist coming.
okay. So here's the twist, or here's the also. The question continues. Also, this family is a military family, and doesn't stay put very long to figure these kinds of things out, which is partly why they ended up married civilly in the first place, since neither were even in the same country in the months leading up to their marriage. It's complicated.
Sure, and the church understands that there are complicated life situations, and so it seeks to make provision for that in its canon law, and it has a provision for this kind of situation. In canon 1116 in the Code of Canon Law, it's dealing with the Catholic form of marriage, and it's talking about the need to be married before an appropriate minister. And it says, this is section 1 of the canon. It says, if a person competent to assist at the marriage, according to the norm of law, cannot be present or approached without grave inconvenience. So, like, the person who is competent to assist would typically be your pastor or someone your pastor delegates. And so it's talking about basically a priest here, or sometimes a deacon. But if the person who's competent to assist according to the norm of law cannot be present or approached without grave inconvenience, those who intend to enter into a true marriage can contract it validly and licitly before witnesses only: one, in danger of death, or two, outside the danger of death, provided that it is prudently foreseen that the situation will continue for a month.
Okay.
So, so if you're in a weird situation where you're in a military family, you've been moving around, you got to get married quickly, you may not even be in the same country in the months leading up to the marriage, that could create a situation where the appropriate minister was not available for a month or more, and in which case you could have a civil marriage before witnesses only, and it would be both valid and licit. So, because of the special situation that applies here, this marriage could actually be valid already under this provision. To sort that out, what one would do in an ordinary circumstance was consult with the chancery or marriage tribunal of your diocese and say, here's what's going on. Should we regard our marriage as valid, or do we need it convalidated? Since this is a military family, though, if they're still in the military and still moving around, then I would suggest consulting with the military archdiocese. So here in the United States, there's a military archdiocese that oversees the pastoral affairs of military personnel and their families. And so I would either contact the local diocese or the military archdiocese, explain the situation, and ask if the marriage is already valid under the provisions of Canon 1116, or whether they need a convalidation, which is simply it's done very simply as just a renewal of vows in front of a priest and two witnesses, and it's not a big production, and it can be a chance to reaffirm your love for each other.
Wow, Christy, thank you for the question to prompt all that interesting consideration of the church's law on marriage. That actually brings us right up to the break. It's an internet open forum on this Labor Day Monday here in the United States. We'll take a quick break, be right back with more questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
EWTN offers listeners and viewers the daily readings to enable you to accompany the Mass of the day. Our Catholic daily readings include the readings of the day, along with online videos. It's a great resource for all who desire to live a life of faith that is pleasing to our Lord. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live on this Labor Day Monday. Thanks so much for being here with us. We love being here with you, and we appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for taking the time. Internet open forum with Jimmy Akin. Lots and lots of questions come to us via the various electronic modes, and sometimes Jimmy and others gather those, and we do an internet open forum. Sometimes there's people who can't call the show. It's just not convenient in their life. Other times it might be just that it's a very, very interesting question, and we wanted to tackle it on the air. This one comes from...
Or maybe just we need a pre-record for Labor Day.
That could be it too. Yes. Little look behind the curtain, Jimmy. yeah, exactly right. So this one comes from Taylor. Taylor says, did the characterization of God in Hebrew tradition differ from the Christian characterization of God? According to the Old Testament, Moses saw God face to face, and God appeared as a column of smoke. However, St. John states in John 1:18 and in 1 John 4:12.
Oh, come on. No. 1 John. There is no 1 John in the New Testament.
I do that all the time when I'm reading. That no one has ever seen God. If so, who did Moses see? Old Testament is pretty adamant that Moses actually spoke intimately with God, not as a prophet does.
So this question comes from the depiction of God that develops over the course of Scripture. One of the things that certainly Christian theologians have recognized is a concept called progressive revelation. And the idea behind progressive revelation is that God reveals himself to mankind in stages. So at the beginning of his relationship with the Israelites, he revealed certain things about himself to the Israelites in a way that was accommodated to their level of cultural understanding. And then over the course of time, he progressively, this is why it's called progressive revelation, he progressively reveals more about himself and helps the Israelites understand him better until we arrive at, from a Christian perspective, the coming of Christ, who reveals God in a definitive way, so that we don't need additional public revelation prior to the second coming. Now, the Israelites at the beginning of their journey with God had a lot of ideas that were in common with other people in the ancient Near East. They did not have exposure, for example, to the Greek philosophical tradition. And so there were certain pieces of conceptual hardware that they didn't have yet. And so because they didn't have the later concepts, they would need to have a more precise understanding of God. They tended to understand God and in a way that was common with that was in common with other ancient Near Eastern peoples. So one of the things that ancient Near Eastern peoples tended to think about divinities was that they were local, so that you would have like a god for a given plot of earth, a given territory. And if you lived in that territory, you needed to worship that god. If you moved out of that territory, you needed to worship the god of whatever other territory you were in. And we see examples of this in the Old Testament. For example, there's one point where David is complaining about the way that Saul and his men have been treating David. And David talks about Saul's allies trying to expel him from Israel and say, go live in other lands, worship other gods. You know, the presumption being if he's not in Israel, he's not going to be worshiping Israel's God. Similarly, after the Assyrian exile of the northern kingdom begins, there are lions that are attacking the new Assyrian settlers in Israel, and they conclude, oh, it's because we don't know how to worship the God of the land. So send us back one of the priests and he'll teach us how to worship the God of this land. They also tended to imagine gods as being embodied. They didn't have the clear matter-spirit distinction that we do. They had the concepts of matter and spirit, but they didn't really have the concept of pure spirits that were utterly divorced from time and space and matter. Those are later philosophical concepts. And so as a result, the early books in the Old Testament, in the Torah, the first five, so Genesis through Deuteronomy, they tend to anthropomorphize God or depict him as if he's a human being, or much more like a human being than he really is. They acknowledge he's not a human being. The Torah says God is not a man, that he should change his mind. He's not a son of man. So they acknowledge he's not like us, but they still tend to assume he's more like us than he actually is. And this is similar to when we teach children about God. You know, it's kind of hard to go to a 3-year-old and say, so God is outside of space and outside of time and has no matter, and he's infinitely powerful and is the ground of all being. You know, that's not going to mean anything to a 3-year-old. And
Right.
so we instead give, like children's Bible stories and stuff like that, and we depict God as if he's a king, like an old man sitting on a throne. And then as they grow up, they get a more refined understanding of God as they accumulate the mental tools needed to understand God's nature more precisely. And the same thing happened to the Israelites over the course of their history through progressive revelation. So early in the Torah, you do have these anthropomorphic depictions of God where he's appearing to Moses, and the elders of Israel go up on a mountain at one point in connection with the giving of the law, and they have a little banquet with God, and they see God, and Moses gets to see God from behind, and it talks about Moses talking to God face to face, which is different than other prophets. And essentially this is anthropomorphic. Now, you can ask, on what level is it anthropomorphic? Is it the text that is anthropomorphized, or was Moses's own experience anthropomorphized, so that, at some point the elders really did have a banquet with someone who they took to be God, and Moses really did see a figure from behind and really did talk to a figure face to face when receiving revelations. It's entirely possible. I mean, God always accommodates himself to us. Um, and because of our limitations, he reaches us where we're at. And so, like God appeared to later prophets in a vision, he could have appeared to the elders of Israel or to Moses himself in a vision. Or he could have used an intermediary. He could have used an angel that he delegated to appear on his behalf. And we see evidence of that in the Old Testament as well, where God will send the angel of the Lord, who is identified as an angel but talks as if he's God, and sometimes is spoken of as if he's God, even though he's also identified as an angel. And this angelic theory is one that has some traction in the New Testament. By the time of the New Testament, people had a more refined understanding of God, and so that's why, for example, John stresses no one has ever really seen God. We also have James saying, with God there is no shadow of change. So the idea that God is changeless is there. Jesus talks about God being spirit in John's gospel, and he says in Luke's gospel, a spirit has not flesh and bones. So there's a robust awareness that God does not have a body apart from the incarnation. So we see this progression in the understanding of God. And that left the authors of the New Testament with a question about, well, then what do we make of these passages where God seems to appear and talk to Moses? Well, according St. Paul, if you look in Galatians chapter 3, this is verse 19, he seems to give us an insight into how he understood those passages. He's talking about the giving of the Mosaic law, and he says, why then the law? So why was the law given? It was added because of transgressions. So people had been sinning, and the law was given to restrain them from sinning. It was added because of transgressions till the offspring, and that's Jesus, the offspring or seed of Abraham, till the offspring should come to whom the promises had been made. So the law was, in Paul's view, a temporary thing that was meant to regulate people's lives, to keep them from sinning until the time of Christ, at which point we'd receive the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit would empower us to not just fall into sin. And then Paul says, and the law, it was ordained by angels through an intermediary. The intermediary is Moses, but Paul says that the law was ordained by angels or through angels, and it appears that he is interpreting the figure that appears and is identified as the Lord as an angelic being that God has sent in order to give the law.
Wow, I really appreciate that question, Taylor. And Jimmy, thanks. What a tour. It's Internet Open Forum. And so far, we're 2 for 2 on Internet questions. Let's see what Rose Marie has to say. She asks this, Jimmy, since we lost sanctifying grace because of Adam and Eve, how is it that some people after the downfall were able to continue to do good?
Well, you don't need sanctifying grace in order to do good. You need sanctifying grace in order to do good from the motive of supernatural love or charity. But you can do good without sanctifying grace. It'll be a natural good, so it won't get a supernatural reward, but you can do good. And this is something that even though, the image of God in us has been defaced by original sin, it's still there. And so we still have a natural capacity to do good. And that's something that gets discussed in the New Testament in various places. One of them is in Romans 2, where St. Paul is writing, and he says, Gentiles who do not have the law, meaning the Mosaic law, so Gentiles don't have the Mosaic law, do by nature, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that what the law requires is written on their hearts. So there's a sense in which the law of God is written on the heart of every human being, even those who don't have sanctifying grace, which is why even people who are out of a state of grace, including Christians who are out of a state of grace, are able to do charitable things and compassionate things. They're able to, feed the hungry and tend to the sick and care for their children and have a natural love for other people. They just don't have the supernatural love of God.
Thank you very, very much, Rosemarie, for that question. I wonder if that some of that idea that we have that people can't do good comes from non-Catholic sources of Christianity. There's this that I suppose that's part of a debate among Christians, but the Catholic position is that you can do natural good.
And human experience testifies to that.
Rosemarie, thank you so much for that question. Boy, we got a pile of great internet questions to come. It's Labor Day. We got a Labor Day treat. We're doing an internet open forum with Jimmy Akin, proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We'll be right back with more of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Can you defend the Church's teaching on the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Do you desire a deeper relationship with our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament? Join us September 22nd through 25th for the annual Catholic Answers Conference in San Diego. This year's theme is the Eucharist, I Am With You Always. Featuring all the Catholic Answers speakers and special guest Bishop Thomas Paprocki, use promo code EARLY to save $50 when you register at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest, both hours today. We've got an internet open forum. Lots of great questions from the internet. As I was saying before we went to the break, Jimmy's the proprietor, of course, of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And that drops each Friday. What do we got coming up this Friday, Jimmy?
Well, so last Friday we had a Patrons Questions episode, and we talked about things like the Mandela effect, the full moon effect, and the third secret of Fatima, and a bunch of other stuff. So you can check that out. That's already there. Coming up this Friday, we have a Victorian era mystery. We're going to be, so this is Victorian England. We're going to be talking about Spring-Heeled Jack. Spring-Heeled Jack was a figure that would suddenly appear and terrify people who saw him. They weren't quite sure what to make of him. Some people thought he was a man. Some people thought he was like a specter or spirit. He would show up all of a sudden and had claws and would allegedly breathe blue flame in people's faces and maybe slash at them with his claws, and then he would spring away and could, according to some accounts, leap extraordinary distances.
How is there no movie about this? How is there no, what'd you say, Spring-Heeled Jack?
Spring-Heeled Jack, yeah. He became a prominent literary figure, and they wrote like Penny Dreadfuls about him. And he kind of morphs over time into a sort of proto-superhero that defends people. And there was a cartoon that was made in Czechoslovakia during World War II or just after World War II, where a Czechoslovakian equivalent called the Spring Man would torment Nazis. And Spring-Heeled Jack has appeared in popular culture in various forms.
All right, Spring-Heeled Jack this week. And that's on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find on the internet. Just type Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World in there. But
or go to mysterious.fm.
Mysterious.fm, very good. And so the Victorian era, is there like is there a particular like cluster of these around some time or event, or just every now and then? Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
the first cluster is in the 1830s, and then Spring-Heeled Jack starts appearing in different places, and there's another cluster a few decades later. And there are some interesting practical explanations for Spring-Heeled Jack, but I won't spoil them.
All right. Looking forward to it. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's Internet Open Forum today on this Labor Day program. And next, a question comes from Kelby. Kelby asks this: I wonder, how are we supposed to view Satan? In the Old Testament, it seems like Satan is just filling a role. I'm thinking specifically in Job. While any other mention of Satan, it is as a title. Job specifically tells us that the Satan is roaming between heaven and earth. God speaks to him as he does anyone else. Then there's a shift in the New Testament where Satan is a specific being and has become malicious. Is Satan just an angel doing what he's supposed to do, or is he an evil entity that is out to get us?
Okay, so to understand this question, we need to understand the way that the ancient Israelites conceived of God. We conceive of God in a very similar way, but it's dressed a little bit differently. Today, people, we're aware that there's one God, and then he has these angels around him in heaven, and then there are also human saints in heaven. Well, the term angel means messenger. That's what it means in Hebrew. That's what it means in Greek. It's really not a reference to a kind of being. It's a reference to a job. It's a job description, a messenger. Well, okay, who had messengers in the ancient world? Well, they were certainly employed by kings, and God is depicted as a king. But usually a king has more than just messengers that carry messages for him. He has a court, and the court will have various court officials, including advisors and commanders for his troops and things like that. And that's how the ancient Israelites conceived of God. They had they imagined God as the head of a divine council or a heavenly court with different kinds of officials, and then the messengers are like the lowest level of the officials. They're just the functionaries or factotums who like run errands for God and deliver messages to humans. But there were all kinds of other officials in the court as well. And we sometimes read about some of those officials, like the captain of the Lord's army shows up in the book of Joshua, for example. Today, we've over the passage of time, we've ceased to make those distinctions among officials in the heavenly court and any non-human who's also not God that is associated with God in heaven. We just call him an angel. But originally there were a bunch of different types, and we've just lost that distinction. So what about the Satan? Well, in Hebrew, Satan refers to a person who makes accusations. And so there was an official in God's heavenly court known as Ha-Satan, or the Satan. You would commonly translate this into English as something like the accuser or the prosecutor. And he basically plays a couple of functions. In Job, we do indeed read that Hasatan has been walking around on earth and is now coming back and reporting to God. And his function apparently is to, look for wrongdoing in God's kingdom and then report back to God when he finds it. And so he's like a court prosecutor. So he could, and maybe originally was, a good prosecutor, but prosecutors can become corrupt. I mean, we have that here on earth. We have lots of corrupt prosecutors here on earth. And in Job itself, we see that Hasatan, or the prosecutor, is corrupt. Because when God is receiving his report, he is talking to Satan, and he says, "Have you considered my servant Job? What a great guy he is." And Satan, at this point, falsely accuses Job. He contradicts God. And so contradicting God is not a good thing to start with. And then he falsely accuses Job and says, "Oh, no, he's just a fair weather friend. If you take away his stuff, he'll curse you to your face." And he's wrong about that. And he's instigating a false allegation against Job. And as a result of that, there is a testing process, and Job suffers. Now, eventually he passes the test and God makes it up to him. But Job suffers innocently because of the false allegation that the prosecutor has made against him. So this is an illustration of how even at this time, Satan was understood to be a bad guy. He does have a job in God's overall plan, but he's doing his job wrong. And he's contradicting God. He's falsely accusing humans. He's causing problems for humans. And so he's already not a good guy even here. And then through the process of doctrinal development that we talked about, it was understood just how deep his corruption goes.
Kelby, what a great question. Thank you very, very much. It's Internet Open Forum this hour and next with Jimmy Akin here on Catholic Answers Live. Up next, a question from Mike. Mike says, "We pray for the souls in purgatory. Can the souls in purgatory pray for each other?"
Well, we're not told in Scripture of any souls in purgatory praying for each other, but liberty is presumed. We have free will. Praying for other people is a good thing. In the afterlife, the saved, including those in purgatory, will have good wills. And if you are a person of goodwill, that will lead you to want to pray for people who need it. Other people in purgatory need prayer. And so common sense would suggest that, they would pray for each other. A prayer is just a request, and you could say, "God, please help me, and please help my buddy here who's also in purgatory." Now, whether they actually do that, I can't say because we're not told, but logic would point in the direction of them doing that, given that there's no prohibition on this.
Mike, thank you very much for that question. Next, the one I've been looking forward to getting to, actually, because I have never thought of this. Rebecca asks, was Joseph of Arimathea eventually buried in his own tomb?
Well, this is another one where we're not told, so we can only speculate. On the one hand, you would expect the answer to be yes. What typically happened in first century Palestine was that you would bury a person in a tomb, and they didn't have formaldehyde back then. They didn't do embalming like the Egyptians did. The whole Egyptian embalming process is fascinating, and actually we know of two Israelites who were embalmed in the Egyptian style. Both Israel himself, Jacob, the patriarch Jacob, and his son Joseph were both embalmed. So there were Joseph and Israel mummies. And we read about that they don't call them mummies, but it makes it clear in Genesis, for example, that Jacob himself was embalmed in the Egyptian style, taking the full 70 days that the mummification process took. So we know about that, but that was uncommon. In first century Judea, what they typically do is wrap you up frequently with spices as a way of diminishing the smell and also honoring the dead person. And then they put you in a tomb for about a year. And then they'd come back, and by that point, the flesh would have decayed because there were no preservatives like formaldehyde to kill all the microorganisms. So the flesh would decay. They'd come back in a year and clean your bones and then put them in what's called an ossuary, which is basically a box for storing bones. And then they would put the ossuary in the tomb. And tombs were commonly used by families over a period of generations. Sometimes they would even put people into the same ossuary, but certainly they would put people into the same tomb. And we read about that, for example, there was a particular, in the Old Testament, there was a cave at Machpelah where Abraham bought, and then he buried Sarah, and he himself was later buried there. The other patriarchs were buried in the cave at Machpelah. So you can see how this family tomb is being used over a number of generations. So Joseph of Arimathea had this new tomb made for him. Nobody had ever been put there, so he was going to be the first generation to use it. And then it would have been inherited by his family, and they would have continued to use it for generations, presumably. And maybe that happened. That's what you would expect to happen. You know, this is a special tomb. This is the family tomb, so we're all going to get buried there. But then the resurrection happened, and it became clear Jesus was the Son of God. So naturally, Christians in Jerusalem were interested in using the tomb of Jesus as a shrine. And the earliest records we have of it from a few centuries later, Christians were using it as a shrine. In fact, there's a great passage in the catechetical lectures of Cyril of Jerusalem from the mid-300s, where he's talking to these catechumens. He's right there in Jerusalem talking to catechumens, and he's like alluding to, as you know, the tomb of Christ is right over here.
Yeah.
And wow, how amazing that would be to be sitting in one of his catechetical lectures, and he's pointing to the places where these things occurred. So at some point, and even today, in the Church of the Nativity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, it has the burial place of Christ. The evidence is really good that is the burial place of Christ, not any of the other tombs you hear reported. And it is a shrine today. So it appears that if Joseph of Arimathea used it, or if other members of his family used it, their bones were later removed and buried somewhere else, because it is a Christian shrine. The question is just how far back does its shrine status go? And was anyone else temporarily buried there before it became just a shrine?
Rebecca, thank you very, very much for that question. I appreciate that. And they find ossuaries from this time, but there's never been an ossuary that would indicate Joseph of Arimathea, I suppose.
No, we do have Joseph Caiaphas's ossuary, though, the ossuary of the high priest who put Jesus to death.
Wow. But no, the bones aren't there anymore. It's just the box that held the bones.
I think there may have been some bones in it. I'm not sure.
So Rebecca, thanks. A great question. Internet Open Forum continues right after this with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Hi, I'm Marcus Grodi, and I'll be at the EWTN Family Celebration in Phoenix, see you there.
Make your plans now to attend the EWTN Family Celebration October 1st at the Phoenix Convention Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Find out how you can be a part at EWTN.com/family celebration.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. We'll continue next hour with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin. Lots of great questions from the Internet. Joan wants to know this. Why don't Catholics believe in the rapture? I have had to explain this so much to people. I think it would be helpful.
Okay, so the rapture is a concept that really only came around in the 1820s. It is not something that goes back in Christian history. You don't find Christians believing in it for the last 2,000 years. You only find them believing in it for about the last 200. And even then, only some Christians. The belief first became kind of popularized by a group known as the Irvingites and then the Plymouth Brethren, and then it spread in a particular school of thought in the Protestant world, which also came around in the 1800s, known as dispensationalism. So this is not a historic Christian belief, and there's a good reason for that. There is not a mention of the rapture in the Bible as it is commonly understood. The way it's commonly understood is an event that occurs, this is called a pre-tribulational rapture. The way it's understood is as an event that will occur at some point in our future, after where Christians get caught up to be in heaven for a period of time while all hell breaks loose on earth. And that hell breaking loose period is called the tribulation, or the time of trouble is what tribulation means. And then and the Antichrist will be running around causing problems. And then Jesus and all of the Christians he took up to heaven will return after a period of time, commonly said to be 7 years, at which point Jesus will slay the Antichrist and begin reigning on earth from Jerusalem for a 1,000-year period, known as the millennium. And then after that, there will be another unleashing of the forces of evil, and then the end of the world with the general resurrection of the dead and the last judgment and the setting up of the eternal order. And this view is known as pre-tribulational, because the rapture occurs before the tribulation, pre-tribulational premillennialism. And this has not been a popular view in church history. There are passages that you could try to appeal to support the idea of an earthly millennium. And so there have been some pre-tribulationists throughout history. But the idea of a pre-tribulation, or some premillennialists throughout history, but the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture is new. It only came up in the 1820s. And the reason is there's just not a passage that describes the rapture like that. The only place that the rapture is mentioned in Scripture, or a rapture-like event is clearly mentioned in Scripture, is 1 Thessalonians 4. And in 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul writes this. He says, "For this we declare to you, the Thessalonians, by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord." So that's the time we're talking about. "We who are left until the coming of the Lord shall not precede those who have fallen asleep," meaning people who've died. "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first." So that's why we're not going to precede them. They precede us. They rise first. "Then we who are alive, who are left, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord, therefore comfort one another with these words." Now, this passage does not explicitly say what happens next. It doesn't say, and then Jesus will go back up into heaven and take everybody with him for a period of 7 years while the Antichrist runs roughshod over the earth. It doesn't say that. It says, at the coming of the Lord, we will meet Jesus in the heavens. Well, okay, so what do we know about meeting dignitaries in the first century? What would happen if you live in a city and there's a big dignitary coming to your city? What do you do? Well, if you want to honor him, you go out to meet him. And so in Rome and in other cities, when a big dignitary would visit the city, the local population would go out of the city several miles on the road and meet him. And the farther away from the city you met him, the more honor you were showing him. I mean, if he got all the way up to the gates of the city and you're there at the gates, okay, that's a little bit of an honor. But if you walk out miles to meet the dignitary, you're showing him greater honor. And then once you've met him, you escort him back to the city. And that seems to be what Paul is talking about here. The idea is Jesus is a dignitary who is coming back to earth. And so we're going to go and meet him. And since he's coming from the heavens, we're going to go up into the heavens to meet him and then escort him back down to earth. And this is the cultural background that most naturally explains this. So it isn't a pre-tribulational rapture. This is the final thing. And if you do a careful study of First and Second Thessalonians, and you look at what they have to say about the coming of the Lord, if you kind of build a prophetic timeline using the information in First and Second Thessalonians, which are written to the same audience and are meant to be read together, because the Thessalonian Christians didn't fully understand what Paul wrote in First Thessalonians, so he wrote them Second Thessalonians to clarify. And so you're meant to read the two letters together because they clarify each other. And when you do that and you do a study of the coming of the Lord, it's very clear this is not a return of the Lord that occurs prior to a period known as the millennium. This is the end. This is at the very end of the world. And so as a result, people have, historically, most Christians have understood that that's what's going on here. They didn't call this the rapture, but they acknowledged that this is an event that will occur at the very end of the world, not before that. If you'd like more information on that, we have a tract at Catholic.com on the rapture. Are you pre, mid, or post? You can find it just by going to Catholic.com and typing in rapture. We have lots of other resources on the rapture as well to help you out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that question, Joan. Jimmy, you want me to find you a short question?
Next
just go
one
on?
Is a short answer. So
okay.
Go ahead.
Jorge asks this: did Mary have labor pains due to original sin? Was Jesus born in a natural and ordinary way, or was it something extraordinary, like a ray of light that passes through a glass window without breaking it? Has the church officially ruled on this matter? If not, what position should a Catholic adopt in this regard? What about those folks who believe Mary did have labor pains due to original sin?
Well, the church has never ruled on the manner of Jesus's birth. Neither has it ruled on the question of, did Mary have labor pains? You can believe that she did. You can believe that she didn't. What the church has ruled on is that Mary always remained a virgin. That is what is a part of church teaching. But the specific manner in which Jesus was born and whether Mary had labor pains or not, that's a matter of theological speculation and discussion. So having said that, and even a woman who is herself unfallen, as long as she's not in a glorified state, she can experience pain. I mean, look at Jesus. He's an unfallen man, and when he was crucified, it hurt. So you can have pain in an unfallen state as long as you're not yet glorified. On the other hand, we do have strikingly early evidence in Christian sources that Jesus did have a miraculous birth that seems not to have involved pain. In the Ascension of Isaiah, which is a first century prophetic work written around the year 67 AD, so it's older than some books of the New Testament, it talks about Jesus having a miraculous, painless birth. So that's a very early tradition.
Thanks for that question. It's Internet Open Forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We will continue with more questions from the internet on Catholic Answers Live right after this. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live on this Labor Day Monday across the United States. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and at least according to some in the Vatican, an important Catholic influencer. We can talk about well, you are an important Catholic influencer. And I just think it's wonderful that the Vatican is reaching out to other people to help communicate. I think that's just a great strategy. Yeah,
I agree.
You were already telling us earlier that, wait, don't tell me, Spring-Heeled Jack makes an appearance, is the topic of this week's Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which will drop on Friday. A Victorian devil, demon, superhero? We're not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
kind
we'll
of like
find
Hellboy.
Hellboy. I'm not really familiar with Hellboy. Is he a bad guy or a good guy? Like, I mean, I kind of.
Well, my understanding, I've never really read Hellboy, but Hellboy is not published. He's published by one of the lesser known comic book companies, and my understanding is he is a demon who is gone good and serving as a superhero, kind of like Etrigan at DC Comics. Etrigan. It was created by the legendary, I think it was the legendary comic book creator Jack Kirby, and he's also a demon who does good, so he's a superhero. And Etrigan has the interesting quirk of he speaks in rhymes. And so the writers for Etrigan always have to put all of his dialogue in rhyming form.
Yeah, well, that won't make you popular with the writers on some days, but being a good demon, not going to make you popular with the other demons. And
no,
actually,
definitely not.
This provides us with a little bit of a transition to our first internet question. It's internet open forum. All of our questions have been submitted in writing via one mode or another on the internet. And Eliza asks this: if demons can possess people, could Raphael have possessed a willing host such that when he introduced himself as Azarias, son of the great Ananias, he wasn't actually lying? I heard an answer recently where you addressed this falsehood, and my husband came up with this potential alternate solution.
Okay, so this is kind of like the episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Reckoning, where you have one of the good prophets possessing Major Kira and one of the evil Pa race possessing Jake Sisko, and they have a battle. So here you would have Raphael taking human form in order to battle Asmodeus, which is what happens in the Book of Tobit. Okay, it's a very creative solution, and I commend your husband for that. In principle, so to answer the first part of the question, angels and demons are essentially the same thing. It's just one is good and the other is bad. So they have the same fundamental abilities. And if demons can possess someone, then angels could possess someone too. Now, even demons, and so of course an angel wouldn't without permission from the person, at least under ordinary circumstances. And even demons seem to need permission. At least, now this isn't something that's 100% for certain, but it seems that a lot of the time the way demons work is they kind of grind a person down until the person is willing to consent to let the demon take control. That may or may not be the case, but it is something that's reported in the literature concerning demonic oppression. So it looks like both of them might actually need permission in order to take control of someone. However, as interesting as this theory is, and I think it's a fascinating theory, and I'd love to learn more about, I'd love to look into Christian history and see what reports there may have been of angelic possessions of this nature. I wouldn't be at all surprised to discover some reports, at least. Whether they'd be accurate reports or not is a separate question. In fact, I know it's either the Decameron or I think it's the Decameron. There is actually a story of this. Now, the Decameron is a work of fiction. It's a kind of book of tales, kind of like 1001 Arabian Nights or the Canterbury Tales. You have these people, it's plague time, so we can all sympathize with that. It's plague time, and these Italians have gone out into the countryside to get away from the plague, and they're spending 10 days in the country, and each day they tell stories to each other to pass the time. And that's what the Decameron is. It's the 10 days. Decameron is Latin for 10 days. The Decameron is the 10 days where they tell these stories. And this is by a famous Italian author named Boccaccio. And one of the stories, this is all fiction, of course, but one of the stories involves a priest who is up to no good, and he's attracted to a noblewoman who is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. In the story, she's referred to rather mockingly with terms like Lady Dimwit and so forth. But this priest is interested in her romantically, and so he goes to her and he tells her that the archangel Michael has appeared to him. And Michael, being an angel, has no body and wants to know what human love is like. And so he has consented to allow the archangel Michael to possess him for purposes of learning what human love is like. And Lady Dimwit, and Michael wants to experience human love with Lady Dimwit. And Lady Dimwit is just so flattered that the archangel Michael would want to experience human love with her, and willingly consents. And since this is a ribald comedy, things don't end up so well for this priest. He gets his comeuppance. But at least in fiction, there have been reports of angelic possessions, and I wouldn't be at all surprised in the last 2,000 years to have other reports. In fact, I remember years ago, back in the 1990s, shortly after I first started working at Catholic Answers, I got a phone call from the Archangel Michael. He called me up. He was interested in getting a free subscription to Catholic Answers magazine. I thought he was joking, but he assured me, no. I mean, he kept saying, no, I am the Archangel Michael. So he was very serious about being the Archangel Michael. He gave me his address at the United Domains of Heaven Earth Embassy, and we gave him a subscription to what is now Catholic Answers magazine, figuring it couldn't hurt him to have it. So there, given experiences like that, I'm sure there are people who have reported being possessed by angels, and I'd love to learn more about that. However, that doesn't seem to be what's going on in Tobit, because at the end of Tobit, Raphael reveals himself. And he explains why who he is, who he really is, why he's here. And then in Tobit 12:19, so chapter 12, verse 19, he says this: all these days, meaning the time he's been with Tobias, all these days I merely appeared to you and did not eat or drink, but you were seeing a vision. And so this is an explanation of how he managed to pass as human, because he did eat and drink with Tobias and Tobit and other people in the story, and he says that really that was just a vision. I didn't really do that, and that would tell us a couple things. The first thing it would tell us is that Tobit or Raphael was not possessing a human being. Because if he was possessing a human being, then it wouldn't be a vision when that human eats and drinks. So since Raphael says it was just a vision, that would tell us that he doesn't really have a physical form and thus was not possessing a human being, as fascinating as that idea would be. Secondly, it shows us that by this point in Israelite history, they'd gotten the conceptual furniture needed to conceive of angels as pure spirits that don't actually have bodies. And that's something that we alluded to earlier in the show, that process of development from more anthropomorphized conceptions of God and angels to less anthropomorphized conceptions due to progressive revelation.
I love the speculation, however, Elisa, and thank you very, very much for the question. We'll take a quick break, be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Bishop Chad Zielinski from the Diocese of Fairbanks of Northern Alaska, and you are listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
You make an honest examination of conscience. You identify what your faults are. You make a firm purpose of amendment. You determine not to do them again. That doesn't mean you'll necessarily be successful, but you make that resolution. I've been eating too much pecan pie, I'm going to stop. Without that, you're really not contrite.
Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Tonight, 11 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I wonder if the Archangel Michael is still getting his subscription, or maybe has become a donor in intervene. Did you address it, Archangel Michael, when you sent it? Do you remember, Jimmy?
I remember the address. I don't remember the specific name that we used.
Yeah. All right. It's Internet Open Forum. All the questions today coming from the internet. Lots of great ones. Lots of great ones still to come. Martin asks this: what blessings can a layperson give? What effect does it have? How does it differ from blessings given by priests, bishops, and deacons?
Okay, so there are actually a bunch of different blessings that lay people can give, and there's no easy way to summarize them. The way to find out what they are is to get a copy of a work known as the Book of Blessings, which is a book, as you would expect, that the Church publishes that contains different blessings that have been authorized for use. And in the preface to each individual blessing, it has an introduction that says who can give this blessing. And sometimes it is lay people. They tend to not be blessings of for entering consecrated states of life. Like you're not going to have a lay person giving a blessing to someone who's becoming a nun. Those type of blessings are right. Given by members, people who are ordained. Similarly, you're not going to have a lay person blessing a church. The priest is going to be the one, or bishop is going to be the one to do a church blessing. When you're consecrating a church for use as a sacred place, that's going to be done by a bishop or maybe a priest, but not a lay person. On the other hand, blessings given to other lay people can frequently be done by lay people. And a classic example of that is the St. Blaise Day throat blessing, where people go up and they get their throat blessed. Well, that one can be done by lay people. And there are lots of others, but they tend to be ones where one lay person is blessing another lay person, or something that is not intimately connected with worship, like a church building. In terms of what effect do they have? Well, they have, in general, the same type of effect that any other blessing has. What you do when you're blessing someone is you speak well of them. You wish some good on them or on an object, and you're essentially asking God to give his grace to maybe in a particular form, like health or function. Like if you're blessing an object, may this tool that we're blessing help us with our work, or whatever it may be. But you're essentially asking God to do good for or through something. And it's then up to God what he does. This is the inverse of a curse. In the case of a curse, you speak ill of someone. You wish harm on them. You wish evil on them. And you're hoping that some supernatural being like God, if you're cursing someone in God's name, will then cause that harm to come about. So the flip side of that is a blessing. You speak well of someone or something and hope that God will do good for or through that blessed entity. In terms of would it have a different level of effect than if the same blessing were given by a priest or deacon? There is no answer to this. It's a matter of theological speculation, not a matter of church teaching. On the one hand, you might say, well, priests and deacons are specially consecrated to God's service, and so maybe a blessing given by a priest or deacon is one that God would listen to a little more because they're specially consecrated to him. But on the other hand, that could be more than compensated for if you got a really holy layman. You know, if you've got a really pious layman or laywoman, and you've got a kind of iffy priest or deacon, the layperson's blessing might have more effect than the priest's. So there's really no answer to that. Also, because blessings are given in the name of the church, they represent an intervention on the part of the church. And so the church's authority is also in play, not simply, or the church's relationship to God is also in play. It's not simply a matter of the qualities of the individual giving the blessing. The church, through that person, is also asking God for this blessing. And so the church's intervention with God is also in play here.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that question. We continue with Internet Open Forum. Lots of great questions from the Internet. Dan wants to know this. If God is omniscient, why does he create souls he knows? Why does he create souls he knows are going to he is going to throw into hell at the end of their life?
Okay, so this question comes up pretty frequently, and I've heard a lot of people take stabs at it, and I've not been impressed with a lot of the stabs I've heard. People tend to talk around the question and discuss issues like free will and stuff, and then end up saying it's a mystery. Or at least they will either talk around it and appeal to free will, or they'll say it's a mystery, or both. And so a couple of years ago, I decided I'm going to write on this subject. And so I wrote a post. It's at jimmyakin.com. It's called, "Why Would God Create People He Knows Will Go to Hell?" And so I'll give a short answer now, but really for a longer discussion, you should Google, "Why Would God Create People He Knows Will Go to Hell?" Jimmy Akin, and it will come up. And you can then read it online and get my more considered treatment. But basically, I go through several different options. One of them, and this isn't my personal solution, but one of them is maybe he doesn't. Maybe Cardinal Hans Urs von Balthasar was right, and God only creates people he knows are going to go to heaven. So even though we have free will and could damn ourselves, maybe no one actually does that. And we might, in Cardinal von Balthasar's words, dare hope that everyone goes to heaven. So that's one possibility. It's not mine, but I mention it for the sake of completeness. Another possibility is that people, even in hell, are better off than if they never existed. That being in hell isn't so bad that it deprives existence of all meaning. It may be painful, it may be frustrating because they're hurting themselves. That's what cutting yourself off from God does. But it may still be better to exist even in hell than to not exist. Then, and there are several other solutions as well, I'll tell you what my preferred one is. It's to reject the premise. The premise that this question is based on assumes that God knows before he creates someone what that person will do with their free will. So God without creating someone, knows the outcome of that person's free will decisions. This is a form of knowledge that many theologians have speculated that God has. It's called middle knowledge. It's the knowledge of what would have happened in other circumstances where free will is involved, but it's not something the church teaches God has. If you go back and look at Aquinas, for example, he does not hold that God has middle knowledge. He holds, and others of his period held, that God has two kinds of knowledge. He knows everything that's possible, and he knows everything that's actual. But what someone would have done by free will if they were created is not simply a possibility. You're saying what they would have done, not what they could have done. And it's also not actual because the person didn't get made. And so if God has only the two classic forms of knowledge of what's possible and knowledge of what's actual, and does not have middle knowledge, then he wouldn't know prior to creating someone what they're going to do with their free will. He would have to, from his vantage point outside of time, create the person and then see what they do with their choices. And so he wouldn't be able to say, ooh, if I create Bob, Bob is going to damn himself, so I'm not going to create Bob. In order to answer the question, what will Bob do with his free will, God would have to create Bob and see what Bob does. And so he couldn't refrain from creating someone based on a knowledge of what they would do if created. And this is the version that I find attractive because it seems to me that if you think about middle knowledge of what someone would do with their free will in a circumstance that never occurs is a problematic concept. Because what is it that determines the outcome of their free will decision? It's not anything outside of the person. It's not like we're machines and all the particles in our bodies interact in a way that determines our outcome. It's not that God has fated the person to do something, so God's not controlling the person. It's the person's own choice. And in a genuinely free will decision, if the person never makes that choice, then it seems to me that there is no answer. Because the choice has not been made. If it's the choice that makes the answer and the choice is never made, then there is no answer to the question. It's like what's south of the South Pole. And so I would say that I find the concept of middle knowledge of free will situations problematic, and therefore I find this an attractive solution to the dilemma.
Thanks, Dan, for that question. Maybe we'll see if we can get that link put in the show notes. So if anybody wants to check out the show notes there, they can get it. But why would God create people he knows would go to hell? Jimmy Aiken, just put in that kind of thing and you'll come upon it on the internet. I'm going to go on to Kathleen's question now. Kathleen, Jimmy, I love your mysterious world.
Kathleen, thank you.
Can you explain what the apostolic pardon is? I think many people would be interested to learn about this since none of us are getting out of this world alive. Thank you, and God bless.
Sure. So the apostolic pardon is an indulgence that is offered to people as part of the last rites. The last rites are ceremonies that people typically receive right before they die. The apostolic pardon is one of them. It's hoped to be a plenary indulgence that will spare the person purgatory, or at least a lot of purgatory. It's typically given in association with viaticum, which is the final reception of Holy Communion. It also may be given in connection with anointing of the sick, and it can be given in conjunction with confession. But those four things, confession, anointing of the sick, viaticum or last communion, and the apostolic pardon, are the 4 typical last rites. And what someone receives in an individual case will vary from person to person. If they're unconscious, they can't go to confession, for example. But it's simply a final indulgence given at the end of life in order to try to spare someone from purgatory or as much of purgatory as possible.
So someone who says so-and-so got the last rites, I don't know if they got the apostolic pardon. Actually, apostolic pardon is one of the rites.
Correct. And it's one that's almost always given because there's nothing to defeat it, really. As long as the person is still alive, you can give him the apostolic pardon. He doesn't have to do anything. And so it's not like confession where he has to be conscious.
Kathleen, thank you for that very, very much, and for your kind words about Jimmy Akin's mysterious world. We will take a very quick break. Be right back with more of what the internet wants to know and Jimmy Akin's answers. Internet Open Forum continues right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Alexander Sample of the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. Keep that dial right here on Catholic Answers Live.
Can you defend the Church's teaching on the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Do you desire a deeper relationship with our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament? Join us September 22nd through 25th for the annual Catholic Answers Conference in San Diego. This year's theme is the Eucharist. I am with you always. Featuring all the Catholic Answers speakers and special guest Bishop Thomas Paprocki, use promo code EARLY to save $50 when you register at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Cy Kellett, your host. It's Labor Day all across America, and we thank you for taking this time with us. You know what? Sometimes on a holiday here in the U.S., it occurs to me that maybe you're listening for the first time because normally you're doing something else at this time, maybe going to work or at work. And so let me just tell you a little bit about us. Catholic Answers is an apostolate, a Catholic apostolate of lay people devoted to explaining and defending.
Now, you just used a technical word, apostolate. How would you say that in a way that would be understood by non-Catholics?
I think most people, like the word ministry would be the one that they would. Okay, so a ministry of lay Catholics who explain and defend the Catholic faith, and you can find us at Catholic.com. You can find out all about us there and see what we do. And we're glad to have you as a listener. If this is not a convenient time for you to listen, check out maybe listening to the replay on EWTN or on any of our services, YouTube or Facebook or our own website, Catholic.com.
Or on a podcast app, because we have a daily podcast. Just go to any podcast directory of your choice and type in Catholic Answers Live.
This hour, it's an open forum. We do open forum usually a couple times a week, but this is a little bit different open forum. It's an internet open forum. All of our questions are in written form. And this one comes from Noah. And Noah asks about a book to start here. And as soon as I say it, I'm going to interrupt myself to ask you about the book, Jimmy. Noah says, the Enchiridion of Indulgences seems to grant a plenary indulgence at the moment of death. Hang on a second. Back up. Enchiridion of Indulgences sounds like a movie book that people would say that some kind of medieval Catholic book. What's the Enchiridion of Indulgences?
Yeah, it does sound kind of like a medieval Catholic magical tome or something that you could get a spell out of, but that's not what it is. The term Enchiridion is late Latin, and it comes from Greek roots. In Greek, hair is the word for hand. Okay. So, and en is a preposition that means in. It means just like what it sounds like in English. So, in hair in Greek is going to mean in the hand. And idion is a suffix that means a little thing. So by its roots, enchiridion in Greek would mean a little thing that goes in your hand. But what it practically means is a handbook. And so enchiridion in Greek is a handbook, and in late Latin, enchiridion is a handbook because they don't have the sound in Latin, so they convert it into a K and a K sound. And so the Enchiridion of Indulgences is a little handbook that contains different indulgences that you can obtain. And so that's what it is. It's the church's official book of indulgences. Sometimes you'll see English translations of it that are just called Handbook of Indulgences.
No.
But these days they tend to leave it in Greek or late Latin, and so it becomes the Enchiridion of Indulgences.
It's just so much better than the Handbook of Indulgences, the Enchiridion.
Yes.
But so here's what
way
Noah.
Cooler.
It does. It's way cooler. Noah says, the Enchiridion of Indulgences seems to grant a plenary indulgence at the moment of death to every Catholic who makes a regular practice of praying throughout their life. Can you confirm this, whether this is something automatically applied to every Catholic who regularly prays, such that purgatory for praying Catholics is not an option?
Okay, so this is essentially an indulgence that is meant to take the place of the apostolic pardon that we just talked about before the break. So if, like, a priest can't get to you to give you last rites or something, you can still obtain the equivalent indulgence at the moment of death, provided that you've been in the habit of, praying sometimes during your life. And so if you look in the Enchiridion of Indulgences, it has the indulgences are all numbered, and number 28 is an indulgence for the moment of death. And it says this: to the faithful in danger of death, who cannot be assisted by a priest to bring them the sacraments and impart the apostolic blessing with its plenary indulgence. That's the apostolic pardon. Holy Mother Church nevertheless grants a plenary indulgence to be acquired at the point of death, provided they are properly disposed and have been in the habit of reciting some prayers during their lifetime. The use of a crucifix or cross to gain this indulgence is praiseworthy. So it's praiseworthy to be holding a cross as you're asking God for this indulgence, but you don't have to. The condition, provided they have been in the habit of reciting some prayers during their lifetime, supplies, so this is the condition you have to do to get the indulgence, provided they have been in the habit of reciting some prayers during their lifetime, supplies in such cases for the 3 usual conditions required for the gaining of a plenary indulgence. And I'll talk more about those in a minute. There are normally 3 conditions you have to fulfill to gain a plenary indulgence. The plenary indulgence at the point of death can be acquired by the faithful even if they have already obtained another plenary indulgence on the same day. And then elsewhere in the general introductory document in the Handbook of Indulgences, or the Enchiridion of Indulgences, it talks about the 3 conditions you normally need to do in order to obtain a plenary one. Norm number 7 says, of that document, says, to acquire a plenary indulgence, it is necessary to perform the work to which the indulgence is attached, like saying a certain prayer or something, and to fulfill 3 conditions. So here are the 3 conditions that are dispensed with for the moment of death indulgence, provided you've prayed during your life: sacramental confession, Eucharistic communion, and prayer for the intentions of the Supreme Pontiff. So you don't have to do those on your day of death. You don't have to receive sacramental confession. You don't have to take Eucharistic communion, and you don't have to pray specifically for the intentions of the Pope, provided you've said some prayers during your life. So it doesn't have to be a robust prayer life, but something. However, there is one more requirement that is not one of the 3 that is dispensed. And it's the next and last thing mentioned in norm number 7 for obtaining a plenary indulgence. It is further required that all attachment to sin, even venial, be absent. So you have to free yourself of all attachment to sin, even venial sin, if you want the indulgence to be plenary, if you want it to remove all of the consequences of sin that remain to be dealt with. And so Noah had asked, as a result of this indulgence, is it the case that purgatory for praying Catholics is not an option? No, because you can be in the habit of prayers in your life, and on your last day, you can still have some attachment to sin. And as long as you have some attachment to sin, it's not going to be plenary for you. It will be partial, and it will help you, and you should definitely pursue it. But it won't be plenary unless you're able on your dying day to remove all attachment to sin.
Wonderful, Noah. Thanks. And I guess we're kind of closing out a series of questions in this regard with Martin's question then. So Martin asks, does the penance given in the confessional in response to a good full confession equate to a plenary indulgence?
No. So the penance that you're given in confession is something that helps deal with the consequences of sin, but it does not remove them entirely. This has always been the understanding of the Church, that even when you go to confession and you make a good confession and you do your penance, there may still be some consequences from your sins that you need to learn your lesson for. It's kind of like when, you've got a kid and the kid's done something wrong and the kid says, "I'm sorry, I wish I hadn't done that." You as a parent may realize, okay, that's good. I'm reconciled with my child now. They've said they're sorry, but they still need to learn their lesson. So I'm still going to ground them for a week. And that's essentially what purgatory, that's essentially what purgatory does. It's to help us purge ourselves of the disordered desires that we have that lead us to sin. It's a way of removing the brokenness that we have. And so even when you go to confession and even when you have done your penance, you may still have some brokenness that's going to need to be cleaned up. And so just doing your penance is not the equivalent of a plenary indulgence.
If you want to know about the plenary indulgences, Martin, just get the Enchiridion of Indulgences. I want to say that as many times as I
get
can.
that in your hand.
Get that Enchiridion in your hand. Thanks for all those last 3 questions. Martin, thank you for that question. We have to take a break now. More Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN Heavenly Hints.
Next time you change your computer password, consider adding a sacred reference into the secret mix. It could be a chapter and verse of your favorite scripture, the name of your patron saint, the title of a prayer, the page number to a beloved hymn, or the initials of all four. The choices and combinations are endless. So is the joy.
A heavenly hint from EWTN.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Open forum this hour with Jimmy Akin, our guest, Jimmy, senior apologist at Catholic Answers. It's an internet open forum. I get to read the questions. Jimmy gets to answer them. And the next one comes from Anthony. Anthony asks, what is the canonical status of the Greek introduction to the book of Sirach? Is it considered to be an inspired part of the book, or is it more like the Greek Ezra, 3 Maccabees, or Psalm 151, a work associated with the Bible and sometimes even printed in the Bible, but not considered to be scripture?
Okay, so we should talk about what the introduction is. So the book of Sirach is a book that it was written. It's actually it's a little bit misnamed because it would imply that a guy named Sirach wrote it. And no, it's actually written by Sirach's grandson. Sirach's grandson was a guy named Jesus, or Yeshua. And he was the son of another guy, and then that guy was the son of Sirach. So it's really the book of the wisdom of Jesus, the grandson of Sirach, but it just gets called the book of Sirach. Well, to add to the generations that we have going on here, Sirach's own grandson translated it from Hebrew into Greek. And for a long time, all we had was the Greek version. But more in recent years, like I believe in the 19th century, we found the original, or at least a good chunk of it, in the original language. And of course, it didn't have the Greek introduction that was written by Sirach's grandson. And so it's an interesting question that you could kind of go either way on, because God doesn't have to inspire just one edition of a book. He can inspire more than one edition. And a case of that is the book of Jeremiah, because Jeremiah originally, he's giving his prophecies, he's having his scribe Baruch write them down, and he gives a copy of Proto-Jeremiah, like an first edition of Jeremiah, to the king in Israel, and the king doesn't like what it says, so he cuts it up and burns it a piece at a time. And so after that, Jeremiah reconstructs the book. And so what we're reading in our Bibles is like Jeremiah Mark II. So God can inspire more than one edition of the same book. And in fact, we have evidence for other instances in Scripture where that's happened. So it could be that God inspired Jesus, grandson of Sirach, to write the book, and then it could be that Jesus then inspired Jesus's grandson to translate it and write the introduction. So this could be an inspired second edition with added bonus preface. And there hasn't been a definitive ruling on that question. Now, the Council of Trent ruled that the books that were in the Vulgate, or at least a certain set of books that were in the Vulgate, with all their parts, are sacred and canonical. The question is, what does "with all their parts" mean? It obviously means the parts of Daniel and Esther that were denied by Protestants, because Daniel and Esther are both books that had more than one edition. And there's an earlier proto-canonical version of Daniel and Esther, and then there's an expanded deuterocanonical version of Daniel and Esther. And so it's obvious that the Council of Trent was trying to include those parts that were being disputed by Protestants. That's without question. But they weren't trying to say that you can't debate what the original text contained, or that every variant reading that's found in a book of Scripture somewhere is also sacred and canonical. So you can do a kind of critical discernment of, well, okay, is this verse, if this wasn't in the original, maybe we shouldn't consider this verse sacred and canonical. That's perfectly fine. But then in between the two, there are certain fringe cases. And in the New American Bible, which is the one published by the Catholic Bishops of the United States, they have introductions. And what I've found is in their introductions, they tend to lean conservative. Now, the New American Bible has a reputation for being kind of liberal on some stuff, but on the question of, is this passage canonical, they tend to be conservative and say yes, even though it might be questionable. Well, what do they say about the Greek introduction to Sirach? They say this: though not included in the Jewish Bible after the 1st century AD, nor therefore accepted by Protestants, the wisdom of Ben Sira, that's Sirach, has been recognized by the Catholic Church as inspired and canonical. The foreword, though not properly part of the book, is always included with it because of its antiquity and importance. So they're saying the book of Sirach itself, that was written by Jesus, grandson of Sirach, that's sacred and canonical, and the foreword by the grandson of Jesus, grandson of Sirach, is always published with it because of its antiquity and importance, but not because it itself is sacred and canonical. So, the position taken by the introductors of the New American Bible, speaking on behalf of the Catholic bishops of the United States, would seem to be that the introduction to Sirach is not canonical, but is just associated literature, like Psalm 151, which is sometimes published in the Vulgate, even though it's not considered canonical. So they would put it in this category, and to my mind, that's remarkable because, as I say, they tend to want to say passages are canonical even when there's a little bit of debate about that. So they tend to lean conservative on this, but they don't when it comes to the introduction to Sirach.
Anthony, thank you very, very much for that question. I hope that answer was helpful to you. We got internet open forum this hour and still some good questions to get to. So onward we go. Eric asks this: what is the difference between sinful usury of the biblical times and non-sinful usury of modern times?
Okay, so usury historically and in biblical times was understood to be any taking of interest on a loan. And in modern times, with the development of a modern economy, it's been realized that that there can be a role for the taking of interest. Now, you wouldn't call the taking of interest, all taking of interest, usury. So it's not like there's a non-sinful form of usury.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question would need to be rephrased a little, but in terms of what taking of interest is usurious and therefore sinful, and what taking of interest is non-usurious and non-sinful, that's something that we don't have a definitive answer to. The church has recognized that the taking of interest can be legitimate, but it hasn't clearly worked out the exact parameters of that. This is a matter that the church allows moral theologians and economists to discuss. So it's something that it's still under doctrinal development. We know it's not all taking of interest, but we don't have a good grasp of exactly what taking of interest would qualify as usurious. So it's still under doctrinal development, and it's presently a matter of theological opinion and debate. What we could say with some confidence is that an excessive taking of interest would be usurious, but that just kicks the can down the road, because how do you know what's excessive and what's not? And that's where the theological debate would lie. So that's a sketch of the situation. Originally, all taking of interest was understood to be wrong, and now only some forms, like of excessive taking of interest, would be considered wrong. But exactly what's excessive is a matter of debate.
Eric, thank you. On we go to Jonathan. Jonathan asks this: is somebody who is unable to access their preferred form of the Mass, that is, someone who would usually go to a Latin Mass and only a Novus Ordo Mass is acceptable, or vice versa as well, required to attend another form to meet their Sunday Holy Day obligation? And if so, what can someone say to somebody who is convinced that they are excused from their obligation if their preferred form of the Mass is not accessible on a given obligatory day?
Okay, so in answer to the first question, if your preferred form of Mass isn't available on a Sunday or Holy Day, you are not excused from your Sunday obligation. You got to go to Mass. Your personal preferences do not enter into it. And in terms of what to say, I mean, I could prefer all kinds of things, but you can't always get what you want. But if you try, sometimes you get what you need.
I was going to say that's what Mick said.
And the Mass is what you need. So you might like a certain style of Mass. You might like a certain parish's form of Mass, just the way the priest does it at that parish. But if he's out of town, you still got your Sunday obligation. So suck it up and go to Mass. And that's also what you can tell someone who thinks they are excused. However, you can go a little further than suck it up and go to Mass. You can also read them what the law says. This is found in the Code of Canon Law, and Canon 1247 says this. This is the canon that establishes Sunday obligations. It says this: on Sundays and other holy days of obligation, the faithful are obliged to participate in the Mass. Period. Okay? There's nothing in there about preferences. So it does not matter what your preferences are. The faithful are obliged to participate in the Mass on Sundays and other holy days of obligation. So that's what the law says. You're departing from the law if you add other conditions in there. It then goes on to talk also about, abstaining from works that are going to hinder the worship of God and the rest proper to the Lord's Day and stuff like that. But as far as the Mass obligation goes, on Sundays and other holy days of obligation, the faithful are obliged to participate in the Mass, period. Now, having said that, you can go to whatever kind of Mass you prefer if it's available. The very next canon, Canon 1248, Section 1, guarantees that. It says, a person who assists at a Mass celebrated anywhere in a Catholic rite, either on the feast day itself or in the evening of the preceding day, satisfies the obligation of participating in the Mass. So you got to go to Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation, but you can do that at a Mass celebrated anywhere in a Catholic rite. So it doesn't have to be the rite that you belong to. Like if you're a Latin Rite Catholic than I am, you could go to a Chaldean Rite Catholic Mass on a Sunday or holy obligation. Doesn't matter what they're doing. It might be one feast day with one set of readings on the Latin calendar, and it might be another day with a completely different set of readings on their calendar. But as long as I go to that Mass, it's in a Catholic rite, I satisfy my obligation. So you got to go, but beyond that, you got a lot of freedom about which form of Mass you go to.
Suck it up and go to Mass. Jonathan, thank you very much for the question. Jimmy, thank you very much for these 2 hours on Labor Day. Appreciate
No
it.
problem. We should put "Suck It Up and Go to Mass" on a coffee mug or something, or a T-shirt.
Oh, yeah, we need a "Suck It Up and Go to Mass" T-shirt. This week, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, it's about Spring-Heeled Jack.
Yeah.
Who I just learned about today, and now I got to find out about this blue flame-breathing devil, or maybe not a devil, maybe superhero. I'll find out on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here, Catholic Answers Live.